Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. So today we've got a little discussion video. We're going to be talking about a kind of common debate among writers, which is, should writers begin with short stories? This is a pretty popular stance that a lot of people in the writing community take. The idea that if you're a new writer, the argument is that if you're a new writer, before you dive into writing a novel, you should start by learning short stories. You should dedicate a certain amount of time to writing short stories. Certain authors have certain ideas or guidelines of how long a writer should spend on short stories or how many short stories they should write before they start writing a novel. So the basic argument is short fiction is the easier form of fiction to learn. Therefore, before you try writing a novel, you should try writing short stories. Learn the basics from short fiction before you try writing a novel, which is much more difficult. This is the old learn to walk before you should run kind of idea. Now, the counter argument here is short stories are a different skill set than novels. Sure, you can learn to write short stories before novels, but that'll just teach you how to write a short story. It won't teach you how to write a novel, so if you want to learn how to write a novel, then you should learn how to write a novel and just write novels. There are certainly truths to both of these arguments, and no writer has the same path to learning. So let's talk about some of the benefits to beginning with short stories. First of all is that it's easier to learn writing craft from short fiction than from novels. Now, I wouldn't say that short stories are easier to write than novels, point blank. They both have their own very unique sets of challenges. But I would say that it's easier to learn how to write from writing short fiction. So they're not easier to write or to do well, but it's easier to learn the principles of character, voice, prose, etc., from short fiction than from novels. The reasons are, first of all, it's way less overwhelming, so you can really just focus on the craft aspect rather than organizing a 300-page long plot, which can get tangled very quickly. And also, it's easier to do multiple drafts of the same story. It takes years, potentially, to do multiple drafts of a novel, whereas with a short story, you can write a draft and you can revise it multiple times very quickly. It allows you to really hone the craft and learn how to edit. I also think that the space restriction does help you learn. Having restrictions on your writing forces you to push yourself more to work within those restrictions, and so I do think the short word count is really beneficial for teaching you how to write. Short stories challenge you to do a lot in very little space. If you can learn to write a fully developed character in 3,000 words, then surely you'll be able to write a well-developed character in a whole novel. If you learn how to pace a short story really well, you can learn how to do that in every single chapter of your novel. Novels can get very tangled and very complicated. That's the challenge of a novel, is balancing so many different elements that all are weaving together over so many pages, right? There's less of an organizational challenge in short fiction because they're so short, so it is easier to focus on and refine the craft elements in your piece. Writing short stories allows you to try more things and implement changes faster. If you write a whole novel, you're kind of locked into the parameters of that one novel, whatever point of view the novel is in, the style the novel is in, the genre the novel is in, and it's going to take a long time to write the whole thing, get feedback, and apply that feedback. Whereas if you write, say, 5 short stories in the same amount of time, you can try 5 different point of views and styles, 5 different genres, 5 completely different characters. You can write 5 completely different stories and try a lot more techniques because each story is so much shorter, and you can get feedback on each piece much quicker and apply it much quicker, right? I very much started writing with novels, and that's how I taught myself how to write, was by writing novels. I started writing short stories in university, and my kind of toolkit as a writer expanded really quickly, because I was able to try so many different writing techniques much more quickly than when I was writing novels. So I became really comfortable with things that I maybe didn't have much experience with when I was writing novels. For example, I'd barely ever written in third person when I was writing novels. I'd written one novel in third person only, and the rest had all been in first person. And so I didn't feel that comfortable writing in third person. And then through writing short stories, I wrote a few short stories in different point of views, different tenses, and that now I feel equally comfortable with both. So it really does help you expand your kind of toolkit as a writer. So what are the downsides to starting with short fiction? First of all, is it may just not be for you. There are writers who just don't have any interest in short fiction. They don't care. They don't aspire to write short stories. They don't think they'll get any enjoyment out of it. And you kind of do have to be invested in what you're writing in order to learn from it. If you're only writing short stories because you feel like you have to, but you hate writing them, you don't care about them, you probably won't really learn from them. You do have to be invested in a piece in order to learn from it, because it really takes that investment in order to do multiple drafts and really put everything you have into the story. So sometimes it's just not for you, and that's okay. Though I do think it is easier to learn how to write by writing short fiction, and from personal experience, I saw my writing improve drastically when I started writing short fiction. That's just not the same for everyone. Every writer is different. If you just are like, they aren't for me, I just don't like short stories, you don't have to force yourself to write them. The second downside is that there are some very important novel-related skills that short stories just don't teach you. The main one is they just don't teach you how to structure a large work. If you can write a well-developed character in a short story, it's pretty fair to say that you'll be able to do the same in a novel, and probably do so better because you have so much more space, right? But structure in a short story is quite different from a novel. That's really probably the place where they differ the most, is in structure. It might be hard to adapt to the very long, complicated novel structure if you've only ever written short stories. Second of all is you're going to have to relearn how to apply the skills to novels. If you first learn to write from novels, and that's your end goal, to write novels, you'll learn all these skills in the context of a novel. But if you start by writing short stories and then you start writing novels, you're going to have to adjust and kind of learn how to apply all those skills to a novel. Most of the skills do apply, right? The way I see it is short stories allow you to get a lot out of very little space. So if you can learn to write a great short story in 10 pages, you really learn how to get the most you can out of 10 pages. So now, imagine you have 300 pages to play with in a novel. You'll be able to get so much out of those 300 pages. But there can be a bit of an adjustment period. You're going to have to learn how to take the skills you learned in short fiction and apply them to a different form. Another thing that I think isn't talked about enough is that novel ideas and short story ideas feel very different, and so it can be hard to get ideas for novels if you've only ever written short stories. I personally experienced this, and I noticed a lot of my university cohort experienced this because we spent most of our writing degrees writing short fiction, and then for our final year as like our thesis project, we had to do a novel. It was so hard for us to get novel ideas. It was so hard to get an idea for that novel because I'd kind of forgotten what a novel idea looks like, because novel ideas are different from short story ideas, and I'd kind of forgotten how to get novel ideas. So ideas can feel very different, and so that can be a pretty difficult adjustment. I think it's also worth noting that it can cause quite a lot of frustration with the quality of your work. Adjusting from short fiction to novel means adjusting from a form that is very short, very compact, much easier to refine. Whereas novels are so big, they're so messy, and for a lot of people, when they're making that switch, it can be really frustrating because you're used to a form that you can refine until it's practically perfect. And then moving over to a novel, it gets messy so fast. You know, the draft is gonna get messy, it's going to require a lot of editing, and it can be really frustrating. You ask yourself, why isn't this as good as my short fiction? Like, why am I not writing at the same level in this novel? And it's because this novel is 80,000 words, right? And it's going to take a lot longer. And it's because it's just so much longer. There's so much more mess that starts to emerge throughout the drafting process. It can be very, very frustrating to make that change. I know a lot of writers, myself included, I spent years only writing short stories, and then when we tried to write a novel again, we hated everything we wrote, and we were like, why can't I write a novel? It's like I've forgotten how to write a novel, and every time I try, it's bad. It's not bad. Novels are just inherently messier than short fiction, especially on the first draft before they've been revised. I think it's also fair to say that starting with short fiction can be a little less applicable in certain genres. Let's say that you want to write fantasy, high fantasy with very detailed world building. There are great high fantasy short stories, don't get me wrong. The world building is going to be pretty different. That's a skill that's going to look very different in a novel series than in a single short story. So there are certain genres where the skills are even more different. And so if you have aspirations to write in a certain genre, it's possible that short fiction won't really teach you all the skills you need. In the end, it really just is a matter of preference. What are you interested in writing? What do you think will help you write? I do think there is tremendous benefit to writing short fiction. And maybe from a place of personal bias, because I do think short stories helped me improve a lot, I would recommend for new writers or writers who want to improve to start with short stories. But I also don't think you have to lock yourself into short stories for a certain amount of time before you can start working on a novel. You can even work on both forms concurrently. And in the end, I think the most important thing is writing what you're passionate about, because that is what will help you improve the most. I would love to hear about your journey with short fiction versus novels. Which one did you start with? Where do you think you improved a lot? How did you find transitioning between the two forms? I found transitioning between the forms very, very difficult. I started with novels for many years, and then when I switched to short stories, it was very hard. And then I learned to write short stories, got very comfortable with short stories, and then it was very hard to switch back to novels again. That's why I think it's especially helpful to know that you don't have to write one form exclusively for a certain amount of time. Write both, and you can learn from both if both interest you. So thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos from us. We've got new writing, editing, and publishing tips every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time, bye.